Welcome back to Just Advisor Things, our interview series where we chat with journalism teachers about how they run their program, advise their publications, and manage their classroom. In today's video, we are chatting with Stephen Green, an advisor near the Houston area, about how he self-publishes his yearbook, even down to creating his own font one year, and how he manages his staff by actually firing himself. We had a super interesting conversation that I know you'll learn a lot from, so here we go. Welcome to our interview, Stephen. How are you doing today?
I am great, and I'm a little tired, but
I bet
I'm
it's the
good.
first week of school.
Yeah,
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We are just going to start by introducing yourself. Tell us about how you got into advising and teaching and a little bit about your program.
sure. So I teach at Caney Creek High School in Conroe. This is my 8th year teaching, 7th year advising. Our student media program is a convergent model. So we have our yearbook newspaper website, and now this year we're starting a magazine, and it's produced by the same group of kids over
Oh,
3 different
wow.
class periods. So
Awesome.
we have 50 students, um, and they divide into different units. So we have reporters, photographers, designers, and a marketing team.
Cool. Wow, that's awesome. And you said you do a couple of other things on campus too, right?
Yes, I'm also a UL academic coordinator, AP coordinator, and the assistant debate coach.
Oh my gosh, it sounds familiar. I think a lot of journalism advisors wear many, many hats. So I'm sure, especially after the first week of school, thank you so much for joining me for this interview. I'm sure you're so tired and ready
Oh,
to
I'm
head
excited.
home. It's funny. Okay, so I like to start with a funny little question. So tell us just a little bit about if you could have any superpower, what would it be?
The ability to create superpowers. That
Ooh,
would
that's
be
a good one.
right. I mean, why not? You could, make whatever you want with, get all your friends together, and now you got a super team.
Yeah, that is such a good answer. I always say super speed because I feel like I would love to be able to just go places and do things really quickly, but I might have to steal that answer because that's so good.
I
That's so
mean,
much
in Texas right now,
better.
maybe like controlling the weather might be helpful,
Oh
but
my gosh.
you
Yeah,
know,
it's like 100,000,000 degrees, which isn't a number, but yeah,
in
it's
Texas it is.
disgusting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is basically. It's like the surface of the sun. Okay, so the whole purpose of our interview series is to tell other advisors how you do what you do and any advice that you have for them, as well as maybe answer some of the questions that a lot of new advisors in particular have all the time. And so, just to start off, like you described your program as like a convergent media program where all the kids kind of do all the things, but describe it in a little more detail. Like, how do you organize that, structure that? Um, Schedule it, all of that kind of stuff.
Sure. Well, one, I fired myself. So
Oh,
what that means is that um, I'm more of the person in the back of the room that's there to help coach and help my editors, but they're in charge. So with 50 people on staff, we have editor in chiefs, section editors, but we also have departmental editors. So essentially, we have an executive editor who is a mini me. She is in charge of all of the publications, working with each editor in chief over their particular publication, making sure we meet deadlines, but also she's really the final quality check to make sure that everybody from a 10,000-foot view is going in the right direction, right? My editors in chief, they oversee, obviously they're the same thing, but they're over their own area. And then we have a managing editor where someone once said that editors in chief manage ideas, but a managing editor manages people. And
mm,
so they're in charge of making sure that everybody's made their deadline, that we have an incentive program that if they do X, Y, and Z, they get a free yearbook. They keep track of that. Any data on the back end with managing staff information, that's all handled through our managing editor. Then we have photo editors. We have 3 of them. One's in charge of um, our organization on the back end. So did they name photos correctly? Did they organize them correctly? Did we create the folders the right way? One of them's in charge of assignments. So they maintain our calendar that's shared with everybody and assigning both events, but also equipment. They also manage the beats. So our photographers get assigned specific coverage areas. They decide that, they choose that. And then we also have one over quality. So he's kind of your photo coach, basically, helping on the editing and actual composition end. And we also have two design editors that basically maintain our style and templates for all of the publications we do. And then I have a marketing director with her own staff, and she is in charge of making us money.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Marketing is not my skill set. And so I told the children who it is their skill set to go do that. And so they take care of that along with, I have someone else that helps work with me, Leanne Treisman, who teaches our commercial photography, but she works with them on marketing as well.
Oh, okay, cool.
And then below that, we just have a lot of section editors that help to maintain story ideas and things like that.
Very cool. So is that how the program was when you started it, or when you started teaching there, or did you create that?
No. So I took over with about 9 people in the program between the yearbook class, and there was one random newspaper kid in the journalism 1 class. And then I had a bunch of photojournalism kids. And so that wasn't how it was. And what I noticed was there was a couple of things. One, they were doing the same thing. I mean, journalism is nothing but photos, text, design, graphics mixed up in a different way for
Right.
whatever publication. So there was a photography person from the yearbook and a newspaper going to the same event. Well, none of that made any sense to me. So about 2 to 3 years after I started advising, I collapsed it because I didn't want to overturn. If you're
Right.
taking over a program that's brand new, you don't want to, toss everything out if it's already working. So I let it sit for about 3 years, sort of as is, and then eventually went, this is silly, and collapsed it.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. And I think I'm seeing more programs do it in that structure. One, because newspaper is struggling maybe sometimes, like to get the student engagement. But also because it mimics real life, like a real media organization works like that. And essentially you are running a small business. And so it makes sense to structure it like that from that perspective too. So when you
For sure.
collapsed it and swapped it over to this format, what did you notice like was working really well, or did you have any pushback from students or community or anything like that about getting that structure in place?
Right. Well, the nice thing is that at the school I'm working at, there's a lot of poverty at the school and a lot of inexperience. So a lot of the students, when they come in, um, through not any fault of their own, just they don't know any different. So
Right.
there wasn't a lot of pushback, and actually there ended up being a lot of buy-in because, you have a photo editor who can take stellar, amazing, national, award-winning photos, but couldn't lay out a yearbook spread to save her life, right? So why make them do that when this kid would love to sit and lay out that? And so the pitch I gave them was, you can do whatever you want. If you want to do all of it, go for it. But you're going to have a minimum, and you get to become an expert in that thing, and you get to do it all the time. And when they kind of figured out, like, oh, I can take photos all the time, write all the time, they really bought into it. So it was messy though at first because there was a lot of inventing of wheels that had to happen. So processes, who's in charge of who? How do we actually communicate across 2 class periods? And every year I tell the kids, like, there's no perfect way. And so every year we're going to change it to make it better than it was the year before.
Right. So because you fired yourself and your kids are in charge of each other, how does that work from a grading perspective? And full disclosure, that is my number one most asked question is how the heck do we grade these kids? So any insight you have is really appreciated. I'm sure
Sure, I
all
don't.
advisors want that.
Sure, I don't grade them; they grade themselves. I also, like I said, I fired myself there. So, and disclosure. So I was in the Kent State master's program. Uh, 10 out of 10 would recommend, by the way. But I think it was in the advising class that Val Kibler taught. I don't know if it was one that she did or one that she found and passed on to us, but there was basically a grade sheet, and students, you give it to them and go, all right, by the end of the grading period, you check the boxes and give it to me and say what you did. I fact check a couple of it, and then that's that. So it's basically turning what you would normally consider as a checklist of like, you have to get these things done, becomes your grade sheet, right? And so each of we call them majors or specialty areas, they have their own sheet. So reporters know that by the end of the 3 weeks, they've got to have X, Y, and Z. And then they have some options too, a menu of options they can do that are extra. And so, but the editor, we have a leadership council for all the editors that make these decisions. And so they every year look at that system and then they change it to make it whatever it is. So the kids, they're essentially grading themselves at that point, right? But it's with my suggestion as to what they need, and they do give some genuinely good,
Mhm.
feedback on that.
Yeah. I think kids know too, like they can be like evaluative, and they can say like, I know that I didn't do my best on this, or I knew it was late or whatever. And when they're given that autonomy, like they typically do pretty well with it. So from a content perspective, I love everything you're saying because it totally empowers the students for it to be a student publication. Like they're the decision makers, they're the ones having to answer for those decisions and really run everything. So at what level do you step in to edit, approve, clear spreads, submit stuff? Like what level do you come into the process?
So in the same way I fired myself, the kids hire me every year. And what I mean by that is they will write my job description.
Oh,
And
I love
so,
that.
right. So they basically, I show them what the minimum is, which is basically like, I'm not going to let you get us sued.
Mhm.
Like that is the bare minimum that I'm going to be looking at, right? But I let the kids every year look at the list and go, what do you want me to do? What do you not want me to do? How, like, I am your employee. Tell me what to do. And so usually, so for my kids, it's often things like, um, you handle all the equipment purchases and stuff like that, that it would be really hard for us to get handled. Or
Mhm.
like some they still do. Our kids do send, they communicate with the printing press for the newspaper. They buy the t-shirts. Um, they have we work well with our financial clerk, so they have access to their activity fund and spend it because it's their money, right? But so this year, for example, they want me. We have our writers are a bit newer, so they're not as strong on the writing as the other groups have been. So they want me to do more copy editing. They want me to make sure that um, contracts are signed on time. Some of that they never really change,
Mhm.
but for the most part, they are the ones that tell me what to do, and I tell them I'm not going to do anything more than that. And um, the only thing I really do to step in is I also say that the um, I will be there anytime you ask me for. So I'm sort of your living, help desk.
Google.
Like you come to me and go, hey, can we look at this spread? Hey, can you look at this photos? How teach me how to write a caption. I don't know what I'm doing, right? Or give me the refresher. That I'll help. And usually I will also just unsolicited, as per requested, give advice to the editors in chief, executive editor, going, I noticed the ship is a little off course. You might want to knock it back this way slightly. But the kids have made decisions before that I didn't agree with, and they lived with that on their own. But
Yeah. And
you
you
know,
too. I think a lot of times advisors feel like they don't want to let go of a yearbook theme or of a spread that is not where it should be. But at the end of the day, you're right. Like those are student publications and those are student decisions, and it isn't your job to go and take the mouse and redesign it, really. But
right.
it's
And
hard.
that's
It's hard to not grab that mouse.
right. But I've also, 2 3 years ago, I had an editor for the newspaper. This was during not when we left because of COVID, but that virtual, half whatever kind of year.
Hmm.
We were going to print our newspaper, and the editor kind of was looking at it, and I was looking at it, and I said, "Are you okay with this?" And he was like, "Nope." And I said, "All right, well, we're not going to publish it." Right. And then that was his call, right?
Right.
I'm just giving you the short version, but he ended up just going like, "Nope, we're not publishing this,"
Yeah.
because it would be too embarrassing. So our goal, like on the newspaper end, we would rather not be embarrassed and just not publish it. We would only want to produce work that's not embarrassing.
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes you just have to make those changes. I think sometimes from an administration perspective, they don't necessarily understand that and they're expecting, 4 issues or 6 issues or whatever. But, you know, sometimes it is more about that teachable lesson of let's do a quality, something we're proud of, something like that.
Right. Well,
So,
but when the administration does come and talk to me about which they almost never do, um, I say, well, you're actually going to want to talk to so and so, who's the kid
right.
in charge, right? Like, I'm like, I don't know. Kids come up to me. What am I taking pictures of? I don't know. Check Basecamp. I don't know. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Um, but it's important that advisors. It took, again, that was 3 years ago that I started like I had always let the kids pick what they want as a minimum, but it took a lot more of my work because the kids had no idea what they were doing. Like I couldn't just cut the cord because they didn't know what they were doing. So
Right.
you can't just come in year one, your kids not know what's going on and go do whatever you want because they can't do that. So you kind of wean them in, train them to, and then so once that wheel starts rolling, then it starts to move on its own. And that's kind of where we were. It took 3 to 4 years for me to really get it where they could be autonomous.
Hmm. And then it
But
trickles on every other year.
and actually the admin like that, right? Like it was just serendipity that one day the my evaluator came in to do my yearly, evaluation, and I was like, you sure this is I mean, there's not really a lesson going on right now because they're doing the thing, right? And they were like, well, I mean, it's
You
where
got
we're
them
doing
there.
the thing. And so they were kind of watching, and the kids just were doing their own thing. They were critiquing each other. And then the editor just kind of got frustrated. She's like, you know what? Y'all come in the back. And so she like went and pulled a small group to do small group instruction on kids for caption writing. And, but that was the editor taking charge. I didn't do that. She did. And the, evaluator loves that kind of thing,
Hmm.
right? But all admin also like to see kids taking that initiative and
Hmm.
buy it.
Yeah, and they want to see that student-centered learning, and it feels kind of like you should be at the front of the classroom, standing up in front of a projector teaching, but in your role as an advisor, that's exactly what you should be doing is
Well, and a lot of schools right now are also on the kick of cooperative learning, Kagan strategies, things like that. And ironically, I found an article because my capstone project in the Kent State program was on creating a set of units for many different things, but that are purely cooperative that for journalism programs. But in that process, I found an article somewhere that basically said the idea of cooperative learning started in the journalism classroom.
mm,
And because producing a publication is nothing but cooperative learning.
yeah.
And so I always found it kind of interesting how we do this cooperative thing, but we don't teach it that way. And by all means, I am totally guilty of up in front of the projector and talking away on certain things, you know. Um, but but yeah, I mean, people like that. But it's also fun for the kids that
Hmm.
they get to not just sit and listen because my voice will lull people to sleep pretty quickly, and I tell them that off the bat, right? Like I'm just was not gifted with that super energetic existence. So I'm gonna let them talk. So
Yeah. But I'm sure they love that too, because at the end of the year, when the book comes out or when the newspaper gets printed, like there's so much more that sense of pride that they really truly created this thing, and it wasn't just they followed along, followed directions. So
right,
I
yeah,
love
I
that.
mean, there's a lot of ownership there.
Yeah. Okay, so tell us about, you mentioned that you have self-published your yearbook. Is that right?
Mhm.
Walk us
Yeah,
through how that came to be.
sure. So kind of circling back around, our school is not in a community that is you know not super impoverished, but there's a lot of poverty in the area. And so one of our issues we had for a long time was no one had money, and our book was so small. I mean, we had um, 1,800 kids or so. I don't know. Don't fact check me on that. But when I started, it was around the 2,000-ish students mark, and our book was only around 160 pages or so, and they had decreased it from a size 9 to a size 8, and it was we were in the red, like we were in the red several, you know, like not necessarily money in the bank, but for the next year we would have been in the red.
Mhm. Mhm.
So there was a lot of figuring out how to do, because the books was half the size of what it needed to be, and it just was so much going on for such a small product, and a lot of that was being eaten up with portraits and things like that, right?
Mhm.
So for the last 6 years, we've published through a yearbook company, um, and we came to the end of that contract, and the kids and I had kind of been playing around with this idea for a while anyway. Like, I wonder how we save money and doing that. And I'm not the first one to ever self-publish, but there's a difference between publishing, let's say, like an elementary school yearbook, which has
Right.
a totally separate purpose, than a high school book. You can get really dangerous with the quality aspect when
Mhm.
if you're unfamiliar, anybody watching, is self-publishing is, um, you are from scratch making everything, the templates, the processes of which you do it, there's no company helping you produce a yearbook. You
There's
just
no
ship
rep,
it.
you're basically going to get it printed after you create it.
Yeah, you ship it off to a printer. So that's where we were with that. Um, was not a lot of money, and then we couldn't increase the page size because a lot of yearbook companies had this odd area in their finances that once you bypass a certain page count, your price goes up, and it just wasn't fiscally possible. And on top of that, our kids don't have cameras. Our kids don't have, like, they need the equipment to produce the thing, and they can't go buy the thing like some other schools are able to. So we have to make money in order to fund those things. So in totality, we were like, we have to figure something else out. So we sent our book, from the COVID year out to several different companies, and they published. We just said, hey, we're considering publishing through you. Can you send us a copy? Just print it, give us a proof, and we'll see what happens. We looked at pricing, and the pricing made a lot of sense, right? There is a lot of structural difference between and a lot of limited options. You don't get to do a lot of fancy stuff with the cover. There's no signatures like you
Mhm.
would be expecting in a real yearbook company. It's because of the way it's printed. Basically, one sheet is glued in at a time instead of stitched.
Mhm.
So we kind of came into this thing of, well, we never did anything fancy with the cover before because we couldn't afford
Right.
it.
Right.
We got samples back from several companies, and a lot of them fell apart. But there was one that stood out well ahead of everybody else, and so we've used them, and their price was hard to beat. Um, so we chose to do that. The hurdle to jump over, that hump to clear, was on the technical side, right? But we had always been producing everything in InDesign and Illustrator.
Okay. I was gonna ask, how did you produce it? So you did it all through InDesign?
Right. And we would eventually, because of the way the yearbook company needed it, we would export as an image and drop it into their system, but we were producing it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing we had used was to flow and index. Well, we had a year to figure it out,
Yeah.
and
And you can do
we
it
ended
in
up
InDesign.
right. We can do it. Flowing, we ended up having a little bit of a problem, a glitch, and we just said, you know what, old school. So we just hand flowed it. It wasn't horrible, and we just took the text file and just linked all the portrait names together in a text chain, and boom, it was done.
Mm-hmm.
So that was easy. Indexing, InDesign does indexing. It's a little bit messier because it requires some manual labor on the kids' part, but um, nothing that I mean, I think that we spent an hour and a half hand flowing the portraits and indexing, you know, cleaning the index may have taken an hour and a half. So that was the biggest stuff that we had to deal with. However, there was a lot that happened before that, right? Like we had already been knowing how in InDesign to create paragraph and character styles and how to create a book file and setting up parent pages and having a back end system built for collaborative design on that
Mm-hmm.
technical structure. So I definitely think that self-publishing is an interesting option for some people, but it's also definitely not for everybody. Like
Yeah,
if
I think that's a
you're
good point because I think some advisors are really drawn in by the price, but especially a new advisor that isn't used to using InDesign, they need that support and that design software that the other companies offer. So I think
right,
that that's an important distinction. But, especially for a school that doesn't have the budget and, might have the skill set in InDesign to be able to do it, then it could be a good solution.
100%. And I love, in fact, I love many people at the yearbook companies I worked with, and people and a lot of the people at the yearbook companies I never did work with. Um, and so it wasn't anything personal. It was
Right.
just for our school, the only way, our kids couldn't afford to go to trips. We go to the state journalism convention. We go to a second state journalism convention. We're going to another one here not too long. Um, we entered all the contests, but that money had to come from somewhere because a
Mhm.
lot of them just can't afford it. And so for us, even if the quality in that the product was slightly less, and it still ended up was really, really, really solid. Like you have to really try to mess it up. Um, and again, think about on the quality side, a yearbook is kind of looked at once and then put on a shelf for like 20 years, right?
Mhm.
So um,
And there is something to be said about binding that lasts a long time, that, in 20 years, the glue is going to be holding up and stuff. And, we really can't tell until we get there. But at the end of the day, if that makes your yearbook happen and it sells more copies and it's more accessible and makes your program grow, then I mean, that's a win. I think that that's a positive, even if there are some downsides.
and there's downsides to both. I mean, we really did struggle, and finally, I just gave it to the students and said, or went to the students and said, "What are we doing?" And they unanimously said, "We're going to self-publish," because it was a difference between, and we don't sell a ton of books every year. We sell more and more, but it was a difference between maybe a couple of thousand and then five figures, right,
Yeah,
of profit. So like we today could pay for the current year's yearbook out of the profit we made from last year.
that's amazing. That's great.
Um,
And
now,
that just gives your students more opportunity. Like, that's
right.
incredible.
Well, and we could technically do that. We're not going to because that money,
Yeah.
like, we're going to buy more cameras. We're going to buy better lenses. We're going to pay for, like I said, conventions. We haven't been able to gone to the national convention ever because it's so expensive. Well, now we can probably take a couple of kids.
Yeah,
So
that's wonderful.
um, it worked for our school at that time. And this is the yearbook that we ended up publishing this year. Um, and we've always designed our own cover and everything anyway.
Hmm.
But I mean, we also, in addition, not only did our cost almost go in half, we increased the size of the book by 80 pages. And
Great.
so next year we're increasing another 80. So we're getting up to 320, and our
Dang.
contract is still not even $10,000 close to where the 160-page book was.
Right,
So,
right.
so
It's just
for
a
us,
big
it worked.
difference.
And I think advisors have to make that decision for themselves. Like, you have to pick a company that works for you in your school, whether that's a yearbook company, whether it's a self-published company. Especially if you're thrown in, you know, and you don't have a lot of journalism background or technical ability, please do not try to self-publish. Go find a company that's near you that you can work
Hmm.
well with.
And don't start year one trying to change stuff. Like, learn yearbook first and know what to look for, how to publish a book in general, and then maybe go look. Okay, so you also mentioned that you guys created your own font at one point for one of your yearbooks.
Right. So that was a really cool experience. During so it was the virtual year, is what I'd call it, of COVID. And we always I took, again, from that Kent State program, the way I heard Sarah Nichols talk about the way that she does theme, and also Mike Simons, who did how, like, I heard several different people, and I kind of merged them into a way to do theme. And so we always build kind of visuals last, right?
Hmm.
Functionally, story first, name it, give it visuals. And so that year, the staff kind of was like, that the whole thing felt very void, like the whole school felt very void of life,
Hmm.
and almost was like so bad it was funny. Like, that's kind of how it was. And so the yearbook editor that year was terrified, because she was sort of the only option to be the yearbook editor, because of half were virtual only and then half were in person. And so she was sort of the only one who could wing it, right? And so, but she also happened to be an incredibly talented illustrator and artist. And so a couple of things hit us when we finally got to the theme, because we decided on the theme of, well, what happened was, right? Like, you always start, that's at the time, that's how everybody started the story, right? Well, what had
Hmm.
happened was, um, and so they decided that visually it was like, well, this is so bleak that we're going to go with a black and white cover, but also because they were inspired by Shel Silverstein and Where the Sidewalk Ends, because his poetry is sort of bleak but funny. Um, sort of that it hurts so much we're going to laugh at it. And so they ended up, drawing this illustrated cover. And one of the struggles we had was finding a font that really vibed with it. And when she did the illustration on the cover, we kind of looked at the font and we're like, huh, well, we kind of like that. And so we said, want to make a font? And so we looked up the process. So I had never made a font, and none of us had made a font. I don't know anybody that's ever made a font. And so I said, well, let's just start with this, go research it, and then
Yeah.
start drawing it out. So she drew it out. We later found out how to, there was some scripts that had been created that you push it through Illustrator, a program that you use to then take that and then merge it together into its own program, own font
Mhm.
that's exported. And so she ended up creating a font called Blocky Rock. And
That's so
so,
cool. And how
um,
creative of a solution. I love that.
and it was a learning curve, but it was we didn't have to pay for it.
Yeah.
She made it, and technically now she has a font that she made and is copywritten, that is just right now it's collecting dust in my hard drive. But if she ever wants it, she can grab
Yeah,
it.
she owns it and she knows how to now. I think that's one of the coolest things. And one reason that I really love when advisors teach within design is because you're teaching those marketable skills and that experience and industry standard software that yes, the other publisher softwares model after, but it's just not the same as using Adobe products. And if they do go in their future to go work in graphic design or marketing or any industry, it's like adjacent to journalism, they're going to be using Adobe products. And so it's such
Right.
a good skill to have. And now she knows how to make a font if she ever needs to. So that's
Well,
great.
and actually now there's a lot more tools available at our disposal that help that, because Adobe is like some of the InDesign is probably the, in my estimation at least, the more user friendly of the programs. Like Photoshop is good until you like, and pretty kind of simple until you get into some of the more
Mm-hmm.
detailed issues. Illustrator is kind of its own thing,
Next level. Yeah.
right? Depending on what you need, it can be a little bit wonky, but InDesign's sort of straightforward. But you know, like even now, I never stop learning. And one of the ways that now we have at everybody's disposal is, generative AI, not for the content creation side, but the efficiency side,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So now I literally typed, like we've been playing with it because it'll write script for you. And so we had an issue, for example, where our photographers just can't seem to figure out the naming convention. So
Mhm.
I had we used Chat GPT to literally write a Photoshop script of batch renaming our images that forces them to name it correctly.
That is so
Um,
cool.
you could also do the same thing with InDesign, right? Just ask it, hey, how could I do this? And the nice thing is, you don't know how to use the script, tell it. It'll give you a step by step. So had we had that back when we did that font, it would have been a lot more um, easier to do because we were learning,
Mm-hmm.
right? But and not to say that you should only rely on, chat AI and things, but it's a tool. In the future, journalists are going to use it all of the time, and there's no reason not to start now figuring out how does that work in a learning space like we have as journalism teachers.
Yeah, I think I've seen a lot of questions in like Facebook groups from advisors about Chat GPT and other AI tools and what does it mean for the future of our education. And I mean, it's scary. Like we don't know what it means. But at the same time, it's not going anywhere. It's here to stay. Can't put the genie back in the bottle. And so I think that finding ways to use it and teaching kids how to use it in a way that's helps us with efficiency or maybe a starting point, but doesn't take away that creativity and that creation that we do, I think is important because they're going to have it regard in their hands already.
Right. Well, and the thing is, it's only scary if you make it. Like I've never been somebody who's technophobic because, in fact, I have a slide that I show whenever I teach, history of journalism to kids, that I love to laugh at because it's basically um, a series of articles and articles after the other going, radio is going to destroy books, TV is going to destroy radio, the internet's going to destroy everything, and now AI is going to destroy the whole thing, right?
Right.
Well, no, things just change. And so if you embrace it and go, how do we use this, and then teach kids to use it effectively now, later they're going to already have the right idea. I mean, look,
Absolutely.
you can't use Chat GPT to write a caption.
Mhm.
It will try to, but it can't interview the kid for you. It doesn't know the nuance of that. Like you're gonna figure that out, right? But you can teachers can, I mean, there's a whole, I can have a whole 4-hour dissertation on that.
Yeah.
But um just as one example, I use it to produce it is horrible at writing news content, which is great when you're teaching copy editing.
Right. Right.
Ask it to do that, and now the kids have a messed up bunch of stuff to figure out, right? But for on the technology side, it is extremely helpful for especially advisors who may be new technologically,
Hmm.
that you can use. I don't know how to create a new page in InDesign. How do I do that? How might I create a book file? How do you do masks and layers? Like, yes, Adobe stuff is great, the tutorials. There's lots of great resources out there, but that's also one option that we have used more on the coding and scripting side to
Hmm.
help us with our efficiency.
Oh, absolutely. And it's very interactive. You can ask it a question in a little bit different of a way than you can Google something. Like it's very human like in that sense. So it's very
Yeah, and
cool.
you also have to front load that to kids when you're telling them about it to go, ChatGPT is not really good at discerning fact from fiction when it's where it's pulling its information from. It doesn't handle multiple viewpoints very well. You still have to do some of the work if you're doing things, you know, I don't think we're ever going to use it for generating actual text, right?
Right.
But you still have to have a brain. You cannot just copy and paste.
Hmm.
So teaching kids the ethical way, Photoshop's generative AI part is a little bit more challenging ethically,
Hmm.
but again, just like anything else, teach them not to do the thing.
Right. How to use it in what ways. Yeah.
Right.
So, with all of that, talking about your convergent media program and teaching them ethics, it sounds like you've done a really good job of balancing your role with their role and like you being the true advisor of the program. Because I think a lot of times as teachers, we get in the teaching role, but advising is different and it's nuanced, but it is more of a um, supervisory position. So with that though, like how would you either compare and contrast your stress level or like your involvement before having it you be this convergent media platform structure versus now where you're kind of fired and you let them do it?
Um, so, well, it's hard to tell because, I was taking over basically at ground zero. So regardless of how the structure would have been, I would have been pretty stressed anyway
True.
because we were having to, again, reinvent every wheel. Um, Here's what I'll say that probably better answers the question. I was a journalist before I was a teacher. I was a daily newspaper reporter and editor. I That was my life, and so that's stressful. Teaching I got into because I always liked the idea of teaching, but also I wanted to help train the future of journalism to do the thing the right way. And so the way I always explain it to kids is, would you rather me, with the background I have and some of the experience I have, and now over time, new things I've learned as I've been a teacher, would you rather me be sitting behind a desk doing all of the paperwork and organizing and not having enough time to do any of that in ways that might not work for you, in processes that might not work for you, editing all of the stories in ways that might not be true for you, photos that might not be the way that you as a photographer want to do it, and then you basically just sit around and do the
Follow
thing?
directions.
Or would y'all all collectively agree to take a tiny part of this, of my job, that is is more of the paperwork side, and you get to run this business, claim that on a resume, get the experience, um, and then I get to be the expert in the room.
Hmm.
Which would you prefer? And so for me, it makes my job more fun. Teaching is not going to be not stressful.
Right.
Advising is not going to be not stressful, but I want it to be stressful in a fun way.
Yeah.
You know, there's a
Stress about
difference
the right
between
things.
me stressing to get every page laid out and approved and all of that and sent out and make sure it's right is one stress that will create all of the gray hair. Or I can do the stress of I'm going to sit down with this kid for the next hour and a half and really explain the nuance of different feature leads and how they could take their story in that moment. And here are some suggestions you can go and do. Or some kid comes up and goes, hey, I don't know how, newspaper editor, I don't know, the last one didn't really tell me what to do. How do I set deadlines? Well, let's work through how you do that together. Which would y'all prefer? Right. So my stress level goes way down as a result of just giving some control over. And it's not that I don't get to tell them when it looks terrible. Like,
Right.
they know that I'm gonna let them know when it looks bad. It's on them to fix it though,
Hmm.
right? Um, like I'm gonna point at it and go, have some suggestions, right? So all of that to say that I tell them I'm not a teacher, I'm an advisor. I give advice.
Hmm.
I'm not telling you what to do. I'm giving you some advice.
Hmm.
You can take the advice or not. That's on you. And their stress goes down, my stress goes down, they have more fun, I have more fun. It's a win-win all around.
Right. For sure. So let's talk a little bit about that fun. Obviously, the work is way more fun when it's in that structure and that format. But what are some other things you guys do to make being on staff, enjoyable, or make them have a good time doing it? Because it is a lot of work. I mean, they basically are working for free. So, how do you guys do that?
Right. So, to no surprise to most people, I'm not the fun person, right? Like, as much as I would like to do, I'm not the cutesy, like, love those people. I'm just not that people, right? Like, I'm the guy who would work all the time if I could, right? So, to start, I tell the kids that, like, if I could, it's all business all the time. So, y'all tell me when you want. So that's one of the managing editor's jobs, is to plan fun at least once a month so the kids can kind of just let their hair down, right?
Perfect. Yeah.
But I'm also just a big believer in organic fun, because some of the best times of my life were in the newsroom, both in high school, college, professionally, because you just liked the people you worked with and liked what you were doing. So I really try to instill kind of the self motivation of, like, you are here because you enjoyed the thing that you're doing and the environment that you're in and being in a space that is yours. A lot of kids, I would say the vast majority of the kids that join either of our introductory classes are not intending to be on staff because they don't know what that means.
Right.
And so I try and get them really excited about, like, even my introductory class, they're producing, like, for real, because that's where the fun is. And then they get to talk with people and they make friends. And I have people that have now gotten married. Like, there's
Oh, I love
I'm sure there are,
that.
like, little green yearbook babies somewhere that, like, my former people have gone off and spawned or whatever. But, like, you know I also try and, like, I am a very tall, deep voiced, monotone person. I have to be funny as a survival mechanism. So I like to inject lots of humor. We have lots of inside jokes. So I'm a believer in, like, just the organic fun and not something that you have to make it feel fun, because a lot of times, like, if we ever set time aside, sometimes the kids are like, okay,
You have to get to work.
when can I go do the work? Like, I
Yeah,
need
for
to go do
sure.
the work, right? Because
Yeah.
especially, in my opinion, when a kid first nails the first time they've nailed it in whatever it is, right? A design, a story, a photo, nailed it. It's great. And you celebrate that, right? That kid now goes, more, please. I would
Mm-hmm.
like to do that again.
Mm-hmm.
And so they develop this genuine love for the content. And if that can do 90% of my work, let's have a Thanksgiving dinner,
Yeah.
right? Um, we go to conventions, right? And then when we're at conventions, it's not just hotel convention back to hotel. We're going to go to main event. We're going to go to this museum. We're going to tour a college. We're going
Mm-hmm.
to go eat out every night. We're going to go, like, all of these things, again, paid for by that work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but they get to do that. And most of my kids in particular have never been to a hotel before or been
Right.
out of the city before.
Flown on an airplane if you go to the national convention. Yeah.
Any of it, right? Never been to Austin, never been to almost anything.
Mm-hmm.
We're not that far from Galveston, and a lot of my kids have never been to the beach before.
Yeah.
So for them, that is another hook in, right? And so um, we don't even really hype up contests that much. We submit to them, and this year we're taking a little bit more intention because I think that we're just, like, right below the cusp of getting some of those bigger awards.
Mm-hmm.
Like I told them, we're doing pretty good work, um, in doing decently in some of these contests without really trying, right? We're trying to produce a good product, and
Mm-hmm.
that in turn led to getting recognized in awards and things like that.
Yeah.
So this year, for example, we're going, let's take just a slight bit more intention with some of these things they're looking for. but still do everything else that we're doing.
Yeah. Well, I think
And
like
so,
that's the right perspective to have. I mean, the awards are nice, but if you are so focused on that, then you're creating for that versus creating the best possible product for your student body, which is way more important than any award, like, and if you're just creating good work, yeah, the awards follow naturally. So I feel like that's a much more healthy perspective to have than trying to get awards.
well, and though that is though to say that like some a lot of my kids traditionally have not been very competitive. And so that's not even motivating. So,
Right.
but now I have this year in particular, I have a pretty motivated group of kids who like being competitive. And so to me, that's a button I can push that makes it even more fun for them and not more stressful.
Right.
And so because I am about as competitive as anybody you'll ever meet, I just haven't had the kids like that, right? So but that's another element of that fun, right? Like I'm gonna pick the things that make sense because at the end of the day, did they learn something? Um, did they have fun doing it? Did they want to come back? Right? And did they leave here becoming a better human than they were when they came,
Right.
in the first place? And so, um, for the fun that they would need to have that requires some planning, I'm just not that person. I give that to a student. Again, I fired myself. That's not my job
I think that
responsibility.
sounds great. Yeah, don't add that stress to your plate, especially if it doesn't come naturally to you just as a human. Like, I think sometimes advisors feel pressure to do it all and they feel like, well, that's not who I am, but I have to, or XYZ, and we try to check all these boxes and you have a staff of kids for a reason. Like, delegate everything.
Right. And it's also important to think, a lot of people, I really dislike this concept that high school kids are immature, period. Well, they're not. Most of the time, they're bored.
Yeah.
Well, when they've really sunk their claws into something that they like, that maturity comes out. If you
Mhm.
like, you got to do the thing the right way, or we don't get to do the thing. And so that kind of gets is part of it, right? So like, why not give some of that power over to the kids? They are capable of it. And imagine if everybody thinks back to when they were in high school, you might have had a job, you probably drove, you probably it's a lot of people might have been helping contribute to their household. Um, you're not also capable of planning a party. You
Right.
can't type onto a spreadsheet. No, of course you can. And so I'm not the end all be all genius. I have some very deep niche talents, but example, fun is not one of them. Don't ask me to put together a table. I can't
Even
do
an
that.
IKEA table.
No, it will be upside down. I literally screwed a bookshelf backwards, undid it, and backwards again in the
Oh
same
no.
way. So why not rely on those kids' talents?
Yeah.
If you have pretty tech savvy kids, for example, and you're not, hey, go learn how to do this and come tell me, then teach me how to do it, right?
Mhm.
Like, let's have fun by committee. And
Mhm.
the kids buy into that. So I have a long way of answering your fun question by saying that I don't,
That's
other
okay.
than
That was
to
great.
have the kids, like, I want them to have fun because they're here doing the thing I love and have
Yeah,
fun doing.
absolutely. I think that when they feel part of it, then it's inherent, like they are having a good time. So I love that. Okay, well, this has been so great. Like, I just so appreciate your insight. I think that there's a lot of just with it's so I think that there's a lot of things that we can learn from each other as advisors, and just hearing how you do things is so interesting because we're kind of on an island on our campuses and by ourselves, and without having that insight that sometimes you only get at a in-person conference in the hallway talking to each other. That's my whole goal with this interview series, is to share this insight. So in closing, if you were talking to a brand new advisor, someone just got hired, whether they were trying to get hired for a journalism position or they were just thrown into it, what advice would you give someone that's a brand new advisor?
Well, first I would say be transparent with your kids. Kids get it. They're not dumb. If you come in and you're like, look, we're in this thing together. I don't necessarily know about X, Y, and Z. You may or may not know. We got to figure this out together. If you're real with them that way, they're going to buy in. If you try and pretend that you know it all, well, it's going to go bad for you, right? Um, the other thing I would say is ask for help. Um, a lot of teachers, especially weirdly people who are attracted to the journalism world, sometimes are the worst, like the worst at being overly self-reliant. Like I have to be the thing doing it right, or I am not, right? So um, you have to ask for help, and that could be joining your state journalism organization, joining JEA, ATPI, any of the alphabet soup out there for journalism people.
Yeah.
All of those people can help you. So be a part of a community, right? It's the largest PLC out there, right? That you get to, and there's there's mentor programs, there
Mhm.
are curriculum resources. Um, if you try and do it yourself, especially without a background in journalism, design, photography, name it, it's going to go badly,
Yeah.
or it's going to take a long time for you to get where you need to go when someone else, maybe at the campus next door, has already figured it out.
Right.
And I think finally, I would, just say to not try and do it all at 1 year, right? It's like eating an elephant. It's just one bite at a time.
Mhm.
Like and you'll probably never finish eating, right? Like I, even in my 8th year uh, as a teacher, I'm still learning. I've never stopped learning. I never plan to stop learning. I'm always going to look for the next best way to do something that doesn't overturn the whole apple cart. So, um, uh, and as part of that, as someone who is a terrible person at death by comparison, don't continue to death by comparison yourself, right? The There are lots of people, if you're comparing yourself to somebody who's done it for 25 years, that's the it's okay to go, I would like to get there and let's take some steps to get there, but it's not going to be this year.
Right.
Right?
Right.
I still have yet to get a pacemaker or a crown. We've had pretty good critiques, but we're just not there yet. And I'm okay with that. We will get there. It might be 10 years from now, but we're going to get there. And you have to be willing to, you know, accept that help, be transparent, and then just know where you're at, and be okay with where you're at right now, knowing and always be willing to get better for that next year or the next month or the next week. Um, Otherwise, it's going to be stressful, and that's why we have so much burnout. But embrace the fun that it is, and everything else will fall into place.
Yeah, I think that's such good advice. I mean, I see it all the time. There's so many new yearbook advisors, which is the whole point of organized advisors, to provide those resources that are so needed. I mean, the curriculum's out there, but just that kind of like emotional support, that I think a new advisor, they're just completely overwhelmed, and there's almost so many resources out there. It's like, where do I even start? And so, yeah, great advice. Well, thank you so much for just sharing a little bit of the slice of your classroom and your program. It was so nice chatting with you. And I know that advisors are going to be so helped by, learning how you've done it. I'm sure that people might have some questions. So is there anywhere where people can reach out to you? I don't want to put your email publicly, but do you have like social media or anything for your program, or?
Um, well, I have social media, but the kids run it, so I don't check it.
Okay.
But no, you can put my email up there. It's fine.
Okay.
They can email at smgreen@conroeisd.net. Just have them email. Like, I help people in our area anyway, so just email me there, and I'm willing to help out. Um, yeah, I'm like, whatever you need, or if I don't know, I'll tell you who might know.
Okay. That's my like line is, I don't know everything, but I can find someone who does. So
Right?
very cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.